Hi, my name is Elizabeth Budd, and I chose to research the schedule of an Australian school day and how that might affect behavioral issues the school might have, as well as how their schedule could possibly help the U.S. My international partner who I chose to interview is actually my roommate, Melanie Hutchins. Melanie moved here at the beginning of the semester from Perth, Australia, and she is studying business for one semester here at UNCW. And this is her second time visiting the U.S., so Melanie has gotten a little taste of the U.S. before. She's technically a junior here in Wilmington, and she's 23 years old. Um, she attended preschool, primary school, and high school in Australia, as well as part of university, or as they call it, uni. I decided to interview her at the beginning of the semester to get to know her more and to learn more about her country's education system. My partner has only attended college in the U.S., but one of the first things that she really enjoyed getting adjusted to was when her classes began. Her classes began all after 11 o'clock, and so she really enjoys being able to sleep in, she told me. Some adjustments she's had to make were to her personal life and her eating habits. According to Melanie, our food here is a lot more unhealthy than food is in Australia. And on top of that, the fact that she's a vegetarian has made finding foods to eat a lot more difficult. This is my roommate Melanie, and this is a map of Australia, including the location of Perth, where she's from. And this is a picture of the city, Perth. I did not know that Australia is as large as it is. I thought it was very small, but in actuality, it just has a small population. I also did not know that Australia's economy was so proficient in recent years. I was not aware that Australia was divided into states and that Perth, where Melanie is from, is the capital of Western Australia. One misconception that I had in my head was that Australia was all desert and dry and had very few beaches, or nice beaches. Um, in actuality, Australia is considered one of the driest continents in the world, but it has many big cities and landscapes much like the U.S. The climate in Perth is similar to Wilmington, but warmer and drier, and certainly not as humid. Cricket, soccer, and netball are three of the most popular sports in Australia, along with rugby, which is something I also did not know. Here's a map of Australia, including all of the states and territories within it. Here is a picture of the coast of Australia, as well as this. This is my stereotypical idea of Australia, desert and dry. And here is a map of the climate of Perth, which is where Melanie is from. This is Australia's favorite sports team, their rugby team. My issue of focus specifically was what is the schedule like for schools in Australia and how does that affect students concerning behavioral issues? Is the system effective and how are there any serious behavior issues that correlate with the schedule? And can the U.S. Use any of this information to help improve our own education system? The education system in Australia is much like ours here in the U.S., but it is reversed because their seasons are reversed from ours, naturally. Students begin their year in February and end their year by the end of November. Their school year is divided into 4 quadrants or grading periods, which is different from our US's 2 semesters. Students begin school at about age 5, and that is preschool. And then they move on to primary school at age 6 through age 12. High school begins around age 12 and goes until age 17 when students can graduate. After high school, students can go to university, which I've already said is what they call uni, or they can go to trade school, which is known as TAFE, T-A-F-E, or else participate in an apprenticeship of that trade, or else some people don't graduate high school, of course. On any given Monday through Friday, Melanie would wake up around 7 in the morning and leave the house by 8 to get to school by 8:30, which was very similar to my schedule in high school. The siren would ring, or as we would call it, the bell would ring at 8:45, and students report to their form room, which is much like a homeroom here in the U.S. that many high schools have, although my high school did not have a homeroom. Here in form room, the teachers would take roll, and students had a time to kind of just talk to each other and get prepared for the day, and kind of, I guess, wake up for the day. Next, students would report to first period, and there are 6 periods throughout the day, and also there are 3 breaks, including lunch break. The school days ended by 3:10 in high school, but in primary school, they were complete by 3 o'clock. This is a calendar for a typical Western Australian school. Our education systems in the US and Australia are very similar in the general layout, but one thing that I like that Melanie mentioned that her school did that we do not do all the time here in the US is the implementation of multiple breaks throughout the day. In the US, I did not really have breaks except for about 20 minutes for lunch, which is a very short amount of time. Our school was extremely overcrowded, and so in order to fit everyone in to allow everyone to have equal lunch periods, we only had 20 minutes. I like that Australia has multiple breaks throughout the day as well as a longer lunch period because I think that students should be allowed that in order to excel in the classroom. I feel like if schools in the US had breaks throughout the day, students would be more refreshed and more likely to focus on their studies. Students only have a certain attention span, and after that amount of time, it is very hard for anyone to focus. I believe that students would perform better in school if they were allowed time to just be kids and talk together with friends for just a few minutes throughout the day. I also like the idea of having a form class, much like homeroom in many schools. We did not have homeroom in our high school, but I feel like it would be a great idea to get students involved in the school and to promote camaraderie among the students. This can also give teachers a good time to gather their materials for class that day and make better preparations for the day. Here are a few statistics I found about schools in Australia. Some discipline problems that Melanie noticed that could be attributed to the schedule issues are that students often got hungry because lunch was so late, as well as many students couldn't pay attention to consecutive classes. Melanie noticed that students often acted up because they quickly lost interest in class, and the day could get monotonous. She believes that more frequent breaks could be beneficial to the students. Melanie also mentioned that one big issue regarding this is the fact that they had double periods. This is basically where students have one class that lasts for two class periods. And this oftentimes went without a break, is what she said. So it was very difficult for students to focus through not only one but 2 periods. Um, One other scheduling issue that she found a problem with was having 6 periods a day. This became very difficult sometimes to remember all the information presented in each class because students had to focus on so many subjects. If Melanie could change anything about the schedule of the day, she would first add a few more breaks, just basically 1 to 2 more breaks, but make them shorter so that students would have more times and more opportunities to just be refreshed throughout the day. She would also start school later and end later, as well as have lunch earlier. Melanie has grown accustomed to starting college courses at 11 and thinks that beginning classes later allows for students to be more prepared for the day. One thing she really did like that she would recommend to schools in the US was the form room at the beginning of the day. I know some schools do have homeroom, but my high school did not, and I think it's a great idea to allow students and teachers to prepare for the day. The Program for International Student Assessment, also known as PISA, which was taken in 2006, ranked the Australian education system as 6th for reading, 8th for science, and 13th for mathematics, on a worldwide scale including 56 countries, while the US is ranked 15th in reading literacy, 24th in math, and 21st in science. Although this is a very limited view in comparison of the two education systems, it does speak a good amount to how well Australia is performing on a worldwide scale as far as education is concerned. These are the PISA results from 2000 to 2006. Some of the main similarities between the US and Australian schools are in the general layout, school day, and amount of time the students go to school each year. In high school, I went to school the same amount of time as Melanie did, on the same days, and we also had 6 periods a day, until we switched to the block system, which included 4 classes in the day instead of 6. One other similarity is through the funding of schools. Most funding is done through the state and federal government in both countries, but there are also private and religious schools that are privately funded in both situations. Some of the biggest differences are the way that students are divided into formed teams in which they participate in sporting events in high school, we participated in sporting events by what sport you wanted to play, and it was all um, voluntary. Also, their school year is reversed from ours because their seasons are different than ours. One other main difference that I learned is that Australian schools use public transportation to get to school, unlike in the US, where schools are provided buses to take students back and forth to school. When Melanie first came here, she was excited to see big yellow school buses going up and down College at 3 o'clock every day. Another difference between Australia and the US is that education is only compulsory for 11 years in Australia, while in the US you must attend school from ages 7 to 16. This is the Australian flag, as well as their public transportation buses that Melanie talked about riding to school on. And of course, here's the American flag, as well as our typical school buses that we see every single day. I have really enjoyed interviewing Melanie and getting to know her better through this project. I have learned a lot about the Australian school system that she grew up in comparison to mine. I believe that our school systems are very similar, but we can gain insight into how to perform better by mirroring their ideas in scheduling, as well as teaching and performance. After completing this project, I hope to visit Australia one day and discover their education for myself, in hopes of developing my research more and gaining more insight into how to improve our education here in the U.S. to the best of its ability.